Time for another great episode of popular Wikipedia articles. I'm your sensible host, Rupert. Today, we're going to learn about our subject. General Data Protection Regulation. The General Data Protection Regulation 2016/679 is a regulation in EU law on data protection and privacy for all individuals within the European Union and the European Economic Area. It also addresses the export of personal data outside the EU and EEA areas. The GDPR aims primarily to give control to individuals over their personal data and to simplify the regulatory environment for international business by unifying the regulation within the EU, superseding the Data Protection Directive 95/46/EC. The regulation contains provisions and requirements pertaining to the processing of personal data of individuals inside the European Union, and applies to an enterprise established in the EU or, regardless of its location and the data subject's citizenship, that is processing the personal data of people inside the EU. Controllers of personal data must put in place appropriate technical and organizational measures to implement the data protection principles. Data protection by design and by default means that business processes that handle personal data must be designed and built with consideration of the principles and provide safeguards to protect data and use the highest possible privacy settings by default, so that the data is not available publicly without explicit, informed consent, and cannot be used to identify a subject without additional information stored separately. No personal data may be processed unless it is done under a lawful basis specified by the regulation or unless the data controller or processor has received an unambiguous and individualized affirmation of consent from the data subject. The data subject has the right to revoke this consent at any time. A processor of personal data must clearly disclose any data collection, declare the lawful basis and purpose for data processing, and state how long data is being retained and if it is being shared with any third parties or outside of the EU. Data subjects have the right to request a portable copy of the data collected by a processor in a common format, and the right to have their data erased under certain circumstances. Public authorities, and businesses whose core activities center around regular or systematic processing of personal data, are required to employ a data protection officer, who is responsible for managing compliance with the GDPR. Businesses must report any data breaches within 72 hours if they have an adverse effect on user privacy. The GDPR was adopted on 14 April 2016, and became enforceable beginning 25 May 2018. As the GDPR is a regulation, not a directive, it does not require national governments to pass any enabling legislation and is directly binding and applicable. In some cases, violators of the GDPR may be fined up to €20 million or up to 4% of the annual worldwide turnover of the preceding financial year in case of an enterprise, whichever is greater. And now, regrettably, we've come to the end. I hope you've learned something. Go share it with a friend and astound them. Click the mirthful subscribe button below. I'll see you just around the corner.